Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of This Is Not Church. I am John Turney, and with me always is my brother, Nat.
Yo.
Give a little shout out there, Nat.
Yo, what up?
Wow. you always bring the stuff. You always bring it.
There's nothing more fun than a middle-aged white guy going, yo, what up? How you doing?
Yeah, really. Yeah. Nothing to make us sound more white than possible than that right there.
Hey,
thank you.
Be
Thank
nice,
you for
man.
that.
I am.
I'm sorry. The truth is the truth, and we just got to live with it. But anyway,
that's right. Lean in.
Back to what we're doing here. But we are honored to have with us today Brandon Andress. He is the author of an upcoming book titled What Can't Be Hidden. So I'm going to give you a quick bio for him, and then we're just going to jump right into this conversation. Brandon Andress is a writer, author, speaker, and backpacker. He is the author of What Can't Be Hidden and best-selling Beauty in the Wreckage, Finding Peace in the Age of Outrage. As a freelance writer, Brandon has contributed his work to Relevant Magazine, Renew, and I'm going to get this one wrong, Zondervan. Brandon lives in Columbus, Indiana, and is a graduate of Hanover College in psychology with an MBA from Indiana Wesleyan University. Brandon's written work can be found at brandonandress.com. So after that not so great intro by me, but just like to welcome you to the podcast. And welcome to what we try to call professional, but yeah, we're just not professional.
Speak for yourself, chump. Welcome, Brandon.
But we're honored to have you.
Hey guys, how are you?
Yeah, we're good, man. We're clearly still waking up.
That's all right. No, I'm sitting here with a little bit of beard envy looking at you guys.
Yeah. I mean, there's not much else going on in my life, that I can claim is like cool about me, but this beard is one that I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. So
that's sweet.
But I digress. So yeah, obviously we got you on here to talk about the book, but honestly, to start it all off, I'd like to get a little bit more of just your background. I think you spoke a little bit before we hit record that you're not really a fiction writer. You don't really read much fiction. So writing a fiction book, what's the background and how did you get to the point to decide to write a book of fiction?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's a way to get people not to buy the book. The guy who doesn't read fiction and who decides to write a fiction book, how about that? Man, I tell you what, I've been writing for about 14 or 15 years. I kind of stumbled into nonfiction writing. Always been very passionate about issues of faith and spirituality, and started a blog back in, I don't know what year it would have been, 06, 07. And from that point on, I wrote a couple of self-published books early on, 2010, 2013 or 14. And then after doing the self-pub thing, got connected to Choir and published my last book, I think 3 years ago, Beauty in the Wreckage. And then I tell you what, writing for me kind of seems like whenever I think about a person training for a marathon, like I am not a runner. And to me, training for a marathon and running a marathon seems horrific and brutal and just something I never want to do. And that's kind of the way I personally feel about writing books as well. Like if somebody told me that I was going to write a book about anything, I would say, why would you want to write a book? It just seems so exhausting, and you have to keep up a passion for the subject for an eternity. I mean, right? You have to have the energy to start it, but then it's going to go on and on and on and trying to finish it, but to have something that people want to actually read. And so I never go into it. I never plan on writing a book. It's almost like a book comes to me at a moment, and all of a sudden it's there, and I'll take some notes and I'll let it sit for months and see if I have any energy for it. And so how I got into this fiction book, I was mowing my front yard, and I know exactly where I was. I just started. I probably had taken 4 or 5 swipes, and all of a sudden I had this image of a circle that's fractured. And the circle reminded me like kind of primitively of an island, and this kind of fractured idea of community. And I just stopped mowing and I'm like, I'm going to get all of these notes out of what's just coming to me right now. And so I took about, I'm the weird guy sweating in his front yard, and the neighbors are like, look, that guy's on his phone for 30 minutes while he's trying to mow the grass. But I sat there for 20, 25 minutes and just took notes, and then just parked it until November. So that would have been from June of 19 through Thanksgiving. No, I'm sorry, Halloween of 19.
Wow. All right. So with your other writings, though, because I don't want to harp on this that you have not written fiction before, because but it does beg the question. So your other writings were mostly nonfiction. Were they more faith-based, or were they more religious nonfiction, or was it kind of like all over the place too?
Yeah. No, actually, it was pretty narrowly focused. The nonfiction that I would write was centered completely in Christianity. It was, and the blog still continues. I think my last big series was a hell series that I did, like a 10-part series, and I've done a few other things, but I think one of the things that I started figuring out, at least for myself, is that we've changed in this country quite a bit. And there's so much information bombarding people each day from just social media or the news or whatever. I just think that people are getting weary of reading. And I know that over the last decade, I've watched a lot of the things that I've written decline in readership. And I don't think it's because necessarily it's the content. I really believe whether it's the algorithms doing their job, or whether it's just people feeling overwhelmed and shutting off social media, which is primarily the place where I would share with people. And plus, I'm just like, man, people don't need another opinion from another person. And so I've kind of grown weary of what I've been writing, and grown weary of the topics I've been writing on. And as you know, whenever you write nonfiction, it is intellectual. It's what's in your head. It's what you know. And you take what you know, you write it down on a piece of paper or a computer. And I just had been feeling this pull toward fiction for a while, because I thought, it's a different medium where you can engage people differently. It's not just an intellectual pursuit. You're engaging people's senses, the way that they see, feel, taste, touch, and people have to be there with you in order to experience it. And I thought, man, what would it be like for people to be able to feel what these characters are feeling, and empathize with them, and see the world differently, and understand situations differently, and come to it from a perspective. Whenever you're, when you're, at least in my opinion, when I'm writing fiction, it feels like a place where it can disarm people to welcome in ideas and thoughts that maybe previously they had their fists up pushing back.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate with that. I did write a blog for a while. Mine was a fiction blog. So, but it came out of this idea of like putting up all this information and kind of pushing back on people's perspective of faith, religion, and all that, right? And I found that if you're just like throwing facts at people a lot, they can get angry really fast, right? I think we all see that in social media, how quickly people become very volatile towards you pushing back on something that they hold dear. And then when I wrote in fiction, and then also in each one of my blogs, I would have a poem attached. And some of these poems I wrote were pretty out there. I was putting out some pretty heretical stuff. But in like, in the flow of rhyme and poetry, and I didn't get even near the pushback. I finished one of these poems. I'm like, okay, here it comes. I know I'm going to get it. And no. There is a way of disarming people, right? Through fiction and prose. I'm sorry, Nat, I cut you off. You're about to say something.
No, I was just going to make a snide comment about how people don't read poetry, but that's why the no pushback is nobody gives a shit about poetry. But you know what? On that same in that same train of thought, I have found it amusing. I'm a pastor who just cursed on the air, but that happens. But I'm a pastor. I've been a worship leader for most of my life. I'm almost 50. For 30 plus years of my life, I've been a worship leader. It always struck me as very strange that worship music can be borderline universalist in its content. There are songs that we sing by Hillsong and Bethel and these mainstream churches that I know are nowhere near that theologically, but they sing these songs, like his love will never fail, like he's saving everyone. Like there's all these undercurrents of hopefulness and universal reconciliation. And then it would strike me as very strange that I would sing these songs and then some preacher would come up and like undercut everything I just sang. And so, but nobody ever pushed back on the songs, man. His mercy never ends. His love is enduring. His da-da-da-da. You go on and on and on. And we didn't sing songs about how he's going to toss you into a, sulfuric fire pit, that would make Pol Pot and Hitler blush. We never talked about that stuff. We sure as shit don't sing songs about it, watching our enemies burn and how happy we'll be. But Piper can get up there and talk about how God gets glory, from every sinner who's tossed into a, some subterranean torture chamber. So it's very strange. I think you're right that the medium does lend itself to sometimes softening some of those more controversial edges and going, okay, I can take this in the form of. I think that's one of the things that Paul Young did so brilliantly with The Shack, was take a subject matter that was very difficult and very theologically deep. And what I know about Paul is so much of what he wrote about, he intuited. This wasn't a guy who was, had some massive seminary background, although he's very smart. But when other theologians had read his work and said, oh man, you've touched on stuff that I just think Holy Spirit just dropped this on you. Because, this is so orthodox. It is so genuine sort of apostolic Christianity. It's so much that it appears heretical to the Western Christian mind. You know what I mean? It's like, it runs so counter to what we've heard in most of our evangelical churches. It sounds like heresy. But the way he was able to do that with prose, and I imagine that would be a similar thing with your story, that you can put it into a different setting. You can maybe take down some people's defenses somewhat. They're not going into it looking for a fight. And then you may just ambush them somewhat in a good way. I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean, with like, hey, by the way, this story is also conveying some truths that might be easier to understand here. So does that sound close to kind of, and was that your intention, or is that just kind of a natural outgrowth of what it is that you did?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. It's funny because I was talking to some of my friends about, like, how do I interview for a fiction book? Because I don't know how to do, because there's so much of the plot that you don't want to give away. And my friend said, just be like a musician. Whenever people ask them about songs, just say it's left up to your interpretation. And
yeah, for sure.
That part of it's interesting, because I think this book is. There are things that I definitely have to say in this book, but it is non-combative and non-confrontational, and it guides people and it disarms people. And you can go as deep as you want to go with this book. Every single line was meticulously selected for this book. I spent so much time. Every word is important. Every single word is important of this book. Because if you spend the time with it, you will find layer upon layer upon layer of narrative that you didn't expect. So on the surface, I wanted to write a really good book. Okay. So a person could literally pick up the book and read it as a story and be like, that is a really good story. It was funny. It was difficult. It was super emotional. But then if you're willing to, you will realize that there's a story below the surface. Actually, in my opinion, there's 3 stories in this one story, but 2 of them, maybe a person could figure out, 1, not so much, but it's as deep as a person wants to go. And so I would look at this book as more of maybe a primer, or maybe as a gentle guide for people it really depends on who you are and where you're at and what you want out of this. But I think that it can lead you to an experience where your eyes can be opened, to where your ears can be opened, and where your heart can be changed.
So what you're saying then, and what I hear you saying then, is if somebody was to read into this book, because sometimes I feel like we do this, and we read, especially with a piece of fiction. Sometimes we read into things the author did not intend to be there. And Tolkien is famous for having said, like none of the Lord of the Rings, none of it's allegorical. There's no deeper meaning here. It's just a story. And I'm like, I don't believe you, first of all. So if I arrive at some conclusion because I've decided to dig deep into the text and wonder, what you're saying is, it probably was there. Like I did that. Like maybe not as matter of factly as like, I'm going to write this book. I think C.S. Lewis I think maybe that's what Tolkien was perhaps responding or, reacting to, was like, C.S. Lewis seemed a bit on the nose. Like there was no doubt in anyone's mind that what he was doing with his Chronicles of Narnia stories was, I am writing you an allegory. I want you to see. And it was, and I think Tolkien was like, yeah, but I'm not doing that. Like, okay, so if that's what you think,
somewhere in between both those guys, I think. In one sense, I wanted to write a great story, but there's absolutely no question that I had every intention on writing an allegory. So I'm not going to shy away from that fact. And I'll go ahead and tell you guys this. This is not giving anything away. Unless you're the kind of person that actually flips to the back of the book before you start the beginning, then, all bets are off.
What kind of monster does that?
Exactly. At the end of the book, there's kind of a key or a primer that gives people insight into the underlying narrative.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay. So don't flip to the back unless you want to have things spoiled for you.
Just buy the digital book. No, I'm just kidding. You have to roll slowly. You're never going to get to the end. But.
Dude, the only books I ever flipped to the end of first were in school, when they put the answers to the problems in the math book. Turn to the back. I was like, okay. And then they got smart and started assigning only like the even numbered questions, because only the odd numbered questions were, you sons of bitches. It's like, but once we all figured out there were answers in the back of the book, we're like, damn, why do the work, man?
This is how bad I am at fiction. I mean, I've read fiction books and I love fiction books, but I remember in high school, we were supposed to read Frankenstein. And I'm like, who doesn't know Frankenstein? So I completely didn't read it. And I remember to this day, one of the questions, this had to be the question where the teacher was like, either you've read it or you haven't. She said, what color was Frankenstein? And I'm like, everybody knows Frankenstein was green. Wrong.
No. Wrong. Bolts on his neck and everything, man.
I will say this about exactly. I will say this about fiction for me because, maybe just in kind of selling this idea of me writing a fiction book. I'm kind of a 50-50 right brain, left brain guy. And I've spent a lot of time over the years, accessing the rational, logical side of it, where I feel like I've been a little bit deprived and using the creative part. And so for the trailer of this book, which I'm not even sure that you guys have seen, I probably should have sent it to you.
I've seen it.
I created it, and thank you. And people have been like, dude, that seems like a Hollywood trailer for this.
Yeah,
but
it really does.
It's just another avenue. Yeah, it's like another avenue for me. I'm going to release that on launch day, September 7th. But for me, I'm always kind of craving avenues for the creative element and just really wanting to do that. And one of my acknowledgments at the beginning of the book was to my freshman year composition teacher. I gave her a nod in the book because at that time, she was reading a lot of the stuff that I was writing and saying, you are going to be an English major. And I'm like, no, I'm not. But she saw something in what I was writing creatively, which I deeply, deeply appreciate. I think that probably gave me even more confidence in what I could do with the creative word by her encouraging it. So I just wanted to give a nod there.
big shout out to the teachers, man. That's
Yeah, for sure.
John and I,
for sure.
you know, weirdly enough, we grew up together, and we in the same house. Weirdly enough, brothers who grew up together. We were only a year apart in school, and so usually it's now John's ahead of me in school, and teachers up until like junior high anyway, they always liked John a lot. And then I would show up and they're like, who's this asshole? Because John's all, compliant and a good student and quiet. And I'm like, bah! Borderline ADHD, and I'm freaking out and throwing stuff. But we had similar teachers in high school as well. I bet you we could name a couple who were like super influential. We either, of all the, dozens and dozens of teachers I had throughout, elementary, middle, and high school, I could name a handful. The ones who were horrifyingly bad, and a couple who were just brilliant, who steered the course of my life in certain ways. My music teacher in high school is one who I still think of as, one of the guys who saved me, gave me an outlet for something creative when the world just didn't make any sense at all. And this guy was just the most loving, compassionate, encouraging, brilliant man that I think I might have ever known. But so nod out to the teachers who have the ability to, to either encourage or, smash dreams. So teachers don't do that. I had a few that were, and they tried every little bit of my patience. But that's amazing, man. John and I do both read fiction a lot. In fact, John in high school probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think around high school is when you started getting into fantasy more. You started reading Piers Anthony quite a bit. And we started out reading sci-fi, you and I both together, because Dad was an aspiring sci-fi writer. So, and the reason I jumped from sci-fi to fantasy was because, honestly, I didn't have the brain capacity for some of the really heavy science fiction, right? Like Asimov, who I love now, but when I was younger, I couldn't grasp all of his brilliance.
For lack of a better description, his brilliance. But so epic fantasy started from like more of like a comical fantasy with like Piers Anthony and Terry Pratchett, and then I kind of jumped from that into more epic. The first fantasy book I ever read wasn't Tolkien. I didn't read Lord of the Rings until much later. But to bring it kind of full circle back to what you wrote is I had just been on a road trip with my family, and my wife was thinking about trying to come up with a book that she wanted to read with her students. And she's like, well, I'm thinking about doing The Giver. So we listened to the audio book of The Giver on the way up. And I didn't know and didn't realize that it's actually a part of a 4-part series. I didn't know there were 4 books in that. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because obviously anyone who hasn't read The Giver doesn't know this, but anyone who has, which I think a lot of people do, because I think it's become like a requirement in like lower grades classes. But it's a dystopian type story, right? And all 4 of the stories are dystopian. And so I asked you off the air, I felt like that's where you were kind of going with your book, it was kind of a dystopian storyline. But I want to kind of fold that into another question. And that is, we were talking about your nonfiction, and it's all kind of religious based. Would you consider this book of fiction a Christian book? Or would you consider it something else?
Yeah, good question. It is. Actually, funny thing is, I think I made a snide comment a few weeks ago who against the people who always say good questions. So here I am saying it every time.
That's a good question.
Not every question
well
can be
asked.
a good question, but anyway, thanks for the question. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is not a Christian book, but yet it is the most thoroughly Christian book that I've written. So it is not, there's nothing overt in it that's Christian, and there's no proselytizing, and there's nothing trying to teach you anything. But it is a book of hopefully wisdom and the people who guide you along the way. But yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely is in a fantasy category. It's a thriller. It's psychological. It can be very dark and disturbing. And I mean, it's not that bad, but you know, it's a dark book, but I think it's a beautiful book as well. Whenever someone asks me, because this is like the first podcast interview that I've had for this book. So I'm like, all right, well, how would you describe it? Like, what is the point of the book? And I would say the most simple explanation is it is how one person's no can become a yes. That is kind of like the big thing. And it's a story of how we see. It's a story of how we see others. It's a story about the betrayal of institutions and systems for power. It's about the power of tyrannical systems and the way that they fight and battle to elicit fear and control. It's about how veiled we are within those systems and kind of the death of the spirit. Take that as a capital S or a lowercase s, it doesn't matter. But it's also a book about the discovery of wisdom. And it's a story about those who, like I said, guide us along the way. It's a story about those who shake us and wake us out of our trance that we're in. It's a story about open doors, second chances, a story about mercy and grace and healing as we begin to see and evolve. And to me, that there's something compelling. There's something deep to the heart of what we're experiencing right now collectively as a culture that this speaks deeply to. The story is a microcosm of where we're at as humanity right now. And that's what I'm saying. It definitely has something to say. If somebody wants to read it for a really good, fast read and enjoy it, they absolutely will. I made it funny. I mean, there are parts that are, I maybe I'm the weirdest guy ever, but there are parts where I just started crying, laughing at the comedy that's in it. And I'm like, are you even allowed to laugh at your own book like that? But I've gone back and reread it, and I just die laughing at especially one character. But, you'll get that. But like I said earlier, it's as deep as you want to go. It is intuitive and instructive for where we're at as a culture.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give anything away in the book either because I want people to buy the book. I want people to read the book. But I do feel like there is some commentary going on also, be it political. And I don't want to pigeonhole it into say, hey, you're talking about America here, or you're talking about, but I feel like there is some kind of commentary to an overarching theme of what is kind of going on in not only our country, but in the world right now with certain tyrannical people in power, people being told not to question certain things that are going on or being told this is okay to question, this is not okay to question.
That's spot on. And the thing that I would say is that this has to be one of the most important things that I get across every time that I talk to people. This is a book for people. This is a book for human beings. This is not a book for conservatives. This is not a book for progressives specifically. There will be parts where you may even think you know where it's going from a social commentary perspective or from a political perspective, but I promise you it's not. The way that the story evolves, it is about people from different perspectives trying to work through and reconcile assumptions that we've made about each other, the way that we see each other, and from the outside looking in, based on labels or what have you. And so I would just ask, no matter what persuasion, politically or ideologically a person comes from, I would ask them to suppress that, kind of check it out for a while and just let the book play out. Because if somebody reads the first chapter or even the foreword of the book, they may be like, okay, well, we can see where this is going. There could be some political motivation here. And I swear to you that there's not. I'm the most freaking apolitical person. I hate politics and I want to scream and yell at both sides equally. So there's no hidden agenda here. It is a book for people.
Yeah, that's a tough line to straddle sometimes, isn't it? Because even those labels of liberal, conservative, progressive, whatever, they're really less than meaningless anymore. And I don't think people tend to fall squarely on one side or the other down the line for everything. So for example,
right.
I mean, I know that there are people in my life compared to whom I'm ultra progressive. And then there are people in my life who would look at me and they still see me as very conservative. It's just, it's this weird spectrum thing where, compared to somebody else, yeah, maybe I am very liberal or progressive, whatever term you like. And then compared to others, man, I haven't gone far enough in some of my deconstruction or some of my ideology. So those labels are less than useful. Kierkegaard was right that, when you label somebody, you negate them. Essentially, you take away the need to get to know you anymore.
Wait, hold on. Wait. Bill and Ted didn't come up with that?
No, it wasn't Bill and Ted at all. It was, and actually, we can jump on Perry Zahn's story about when she asked the Danish guy about Kierkegaard, and he was like, "Who?" So she's walking the Camino de Santiago with Brian Zahn, and she runs across this guy who's Danish, and the only thing she knows of anything Danish at all is Søren Kierkegaard. And she's like, "Oh, so you must know Kierkegaard?" And he goes, "Nope, never heard of him." And they go on. And she's like, "How could you be the only Dane who doesn't know the most famous Dane?" Well, it turns out, and I don't know if he was just being obtuse or if he just didn't, but that's not how you pronounce his name. And it's like Kierkegaard or Kirko. It's something strange. So I was like, "Oh, you mean this person?" She's like, "You knew who I meant." And then she never saw him again. Like, he disappears from the Camino. I'm like, "Oh, he was an angel taught to teach you a correct Danish pronunciation of Kierkegaard or whatever his name is." Oh my goodness! But when you label somebody, and I think it's a brilliant thought. No, Bill and Ted picked up on it. They're right. When you label me, you negate me, and I'm not even entirely sure that's. I know it's always attributed to whatever that guy's name is. Now I don't want to say I'm self-conscious about Kierkegaard, but whether he said it or not, the truth of it is that, the second we slap a label on somebody or something, we've categorized it, put it in a box, we've decided we know what it is, and I don't need to get to know you anymore. And you can watch this stuff play out in real time. That's the one thing, I love and hate social media. The love side of it is it is a way to get some stuff out, into the universe, and that's good. But you can watch some of this stuff happen in real time, where you say something, and a response is, "Oh, you're just a liberal." Blam! I'm done talking to you now because they've labeled you, they've figured you out, and then there's no more conversation that can be had after that. It's just it's less than useful. It's destructive, and so I think that your approach is admirable. I think that might be that fiction might be a way to cut through some of that noise and say, "Hey, I'm just telling a story here, man. If you get something else out of it, great. If you just enjoy it for the story, great. But it might be a way to cut through some of that static, and get
Yeah, it's hard to access more than the lizard monkey brain or whatever.
Exactly.
It's like how do you start accessing different layers of the brain that engage in thinking that isn't so instinctive or reactive.
Right.
And
right.
I think a lot of times, we've been reduced to 140 characters, or we've been reduced to status updates, and we've been reduced to even, how many times do you look at a news story and read the headline, but don't read the article? And all we have, I think Rohr says that, I don't know if you've ever read Everything Belongs. It's probably one of my favorite books, but he says...
Richard Rohr, right?
Yeah, Richard Rohr.
Yeah, great book.
He says something like, we've been walking on the circumference with very little access to essence. And, we've existed living on the edges. And I think that as a culture, it's kind of a cultural indictment of us as people that we are on the circumference of life, but we also have very little access to essence. And the question would be, why do we have so little access to essence? Well, some of it's our fault. Maybe we're sleepwalking and we don't know, but you could say that all of our inputs that surround us are content reinforcing us being on the circumference. Whenever you have to go deeper, whenever you have to start engaging at a different level, it's an act of surrender. It's an act of loss. It's an act of giving up in some regard. And who wants to do that? Death is painful. So I think that I don't know that I especially thought of Roar and that quote from Everything Belongs whenever I was writing this, but it's kind of become formative with me and how I approach everything is how do you help people? How can I be someone who helps people break the monotony of the circumference and edges and help people access something that's deeper and more essential? And I hope and pray that this book is that.
Yeah. No, and I think, when you talk about accessing, different parts of your brain and you talk about, different ways of thinking, I start thinking of things like linear and versus nonlinear thinking. I think about, how creativity sort of resides in this different part of your brain, and accessing that has the opportunity to unlock certain things, change your, you have these sort of default ways of thinking. And I'm a very linear person, man. I'm a A, B, C. That's the way I go. And so sometimes somebody really creative can take me out of that pattern, sometimes even not necessarily against my will, but can hijack it somewhat and go, hey, well, I know you're used to going A, B, C, D, but let's go. I think about movies like, I think about a movie like Pulp Fiction, where, for whatever it's worth, Quentin Tarantino takes us on the most convoluted, backwards, messed up ride. That is the quintessential, to almost pun, Quentin Tarantino, quintessential sort of non-linear storytelling that makes you pay attention. You cannot rest on your laurels in that movie and go, well, I know where this is going. You sure as hell do not, because you started at the end and then it's like watching Memento, or something that goes backwards. But even to some extent, when we get used to reading so much nonfiction that's going to lay out, this is, hey, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. And we get used to that pattern of conveying knowledge. And all of a sudden, a story can break you out of that pattern. And I think you're exactly right, dude. I think that's powerful.
Well said.
I think it's really powerful. Yeah. So I'm excited to read this now. Well,
I appreciate that. And there is nothing wrong with Netflix and chill mentality. And, here's a confession. When COVID started, I think that I had only watched maybe 3 episodes, maybe I've watched more than that, but maybe a couple of seasons of Survivor in my life. And during COVID, over like a 6-week span, I watched every single season and every single episode. And I can't tell you how many hundreds or maybe even thousands of hours that is. So I'm not indicting the Netflix and heavily chill mindset, but at the same time, like I want something that I can engage with that takes me to a deeper level, that I walk away and I can at least think about it at a minimum or at a maximum to talk to somebody else about it. And my wife and I watched a movie probably 3 or 4 months ago called, is it Mr. Marvelous or Mr. Majestic? Mr. Marvelous. Have you seen that movie?
I don't think so.
Oh, man. So anyway, I'm not going to talk to you. You'll have to look that one up. I think it's called Mr. Marvelous. And when we finished it, I mean, we talked about it for hours because, again, it was a movie that was really super entertaining and good, but the social commentary that was within it just was like, wow, it's throwing all these different ideas from different perspectives and the limitations of everyone's thinking on all the different sides, where you start to understand different perspectives. And ultimately, I think, maybe to be really super obvious here, this is what we need, right? We need people coming to the table and being able to talk again. We need people being able to talk about the pros and cons or the benefits and limitations of an idea without us going for the jugular vein, going for the neck.
We're taking all the jugglers out. Screw those guys and their hand-eye coordination. F those dudes.
This book's for everybody except the jugglers.
Except the jugglers and the mimes. I have a bone to pick with the mimes. I'm going to have a mime on the podcast one day. It's really going to be just silence for 35 minutes. Oh, man. But it's funny because it's a two-edged sword, though, isn't it? I within Christian circles, I get tons of pushback if I criticize someone's ideology And then we're supposed to be loving and kind and non-judgmental and yada, yada, yada. I'm like, absolutely, we should be. But I have to have the liberty to call out bad ideology and have you understand that I'm not attacking that human being. I'm not saying you, mister, are a bad person.
Yeah.
But the thing you just said is horrifyingly hurtful and damaging and will lead to literally sometimes the deaths of people that I love. So I'm going to call out bad theology when I see it. I'm going to call out bad ideology when I see it. And I think, at least in my lizard monkey brain, I can differentiate between calling out concepts and ideas and versus attacking human beings. So if I say John Piper's a piece of shit, what I mean is John Piper's theology is hurtful and damaging and paints God as a monster, and it needs to be taken down. And I still think Jesus loves him very much. And someday he's going to meet that Jesus face to face and repent of the ways in which he's painted him. But I can still say, man, your theology is crap, dude. And every time I say his name, I feel like a puppy gets kicked. And so we need to stop saying his name. And he's not even the worst of the bunch. There's way worse guys. But yeah, we've got to be able to criticize and call out, bad ideology. And at the same time, maintain the humanity of the people with whom we disagree and say, no, I don't hate you personally, but that stuff you said is
exactly
bad. So stop saying it. So
I'll give you a quick story because this illustrates the point. And I've overused this story on so many different podcasts. I've written about it in blogs and books. And so I apologize to anybody who's heard this before, but maybe your listenership hasn't heard it. You guys certainly haven't heard it. So
new to us,
I'll tell
man.
You, way back in the day, I was, I'm in Southern Indiana. I was a good little conservative Republican boy. I believed that the way that our country would be saved would be through politics and through having the right policy or whatever. And a friend and I decided wanted to have kind of like this big Christian/political event where we'd bring in people, taking back America, blah, blah, blah. This was like the year 2000 or 99. And so I started contacting different people to help organize it. And I contacted an artist agency trying to secure a Christian musician to play at this thing. And long story short, after some correspondence over 2 weeks and never getting any response, and finally talking to the director said, I just don't think that the artist will agree with what you're doing. And in my limited understanding of Christianity and the world from Southern Indiana, I had no comprehension of what they were talking. I was like, is there another way to do this? Is there another perspective? And I was like, I don't understand. So like, I'm coming from a position of like unknowing, not having any idea, just complete non-knowing. And I was being vulnerable. I'm like, well, I don't understand how, like, what is there to disagree with? Like, how would you do it otherwise? And the director said, I just don't agree with politics, and I don't believe that that's the way the kingdom of God moves forward. And I still didn't understand what he was saying. And I'm like pushing. I'm like, tell me what you're talking about. And this is the critical, just absolutely critical point. He said, people like you will never get it. And I was like, so fast forward, here we are 21 years later. I did get it. No thanks to that jackass. But I think what would have happened had someone had patience with me and realized that, sometimes the people that you disagree with ideologically grew up within a system. They grew up within what they thought was right and the best at the time. And even some of the, ways that we think and the ways that we convey those ideas to the world, yes, they can be detrimental, hurtful, harmful, and yes, we need to call those things out. But underneath of it, granted, there are some hardened, calcified, ossified people that you're never going to crack through the surface and get to anything deeper. but there are people that are still searching. They may not even know they're searching, but they need our mercy and our grace and our love and our patience because they're on a journey that one day they may. And you may be the person that was just graceful enough to walk with them and help them see otherwise. And so, this book here is not a sledgehammer, man. It's not a list of dictates. It's not coercive. It's not manipulative. It doesn't have an agenda. It is a gentle guide, like I said earlier. And I believe that what we've long been missing has been wisdom, and hopefully it will guide us into the recovery of wisdom.
I agree with you 1,000%. I mean, I think fiction has this way of introducing thought, introducing an opinion, or whatever you want to call it, but in a way that's not obtrusive, right? It's not like in your face. It's not, I mean, it can be. I mean, there's fiction that's written that way, and it's written on that way on purpose. But I'm thinking of books like, I think it just became like a Amazon Prime show, The Underground Railroad.
Oh yeah.
That's a very tough topic. That's a very hard thing to be writing about. And then choosing to write it in a fiction and then give it kind of like a fantasy edge to it is like, okay, that's a really cool idea. I mean, because you're pushing some pretty heavy stuff on people, but within a fictionalized story. And then because there's this fantasy element, you can kind of step away a little bit. Right. And then the author has this ability to kind of like just kind of nudge you in a direction of like maybe there's another way to look at this.
Oh, I love it.
And I feel like that's kind of what your book is doing is it's not like in your face. It's not pushing anything at you. It's not pushing an agenda, but at the same time, there's this underlying tone of like, hey, can we look at this a little different? Can we just come at this from a different point of perspective? And that's, is that hard to do? Is that hard to write like that? Or is that just something that just kind of came as you were writing it?
I think that's kind of where my heart has been for a while. Maybe some of it, well, I said there's 3 layers to this book. Right. One that's apparent, one that is allegorical, and the other that is autobiographical. So, there's an element, which, if I didn't really tell anybody, you'd never know. But maybe I'll do a deep dive one day, or maybe it's way too personal to me. But I think we spend so much time talking about the deconstruction of faith and the reconstruction of faith, and everybody acts like that they're in one camp or the other, and maybe we're in both all the time. And one of my characters had a quote. She said, "We're something like we're all students, always taking first steps." And I feel like that's who we are. We are people always just taking first steps, having not arrived at the destination necessarily, but still kind of planted back in what we came from. And this idea of deconstruction and reconstruction for me, I probably started the deconstruction about 14, 15 years ago. And I can tell you that continues today in terms of what I'm walking away from and what I'm walking into. But I think with this book being somewhat autobiographical, it was catharsis. It was a way of me kind of coming to terms with some of the things that I've been dealing with or holding on to, or my personal anger towards systems and institutions and how to walk away from that. So it was as much a cathartic experience for me than anything. And I can't even remember if that was what you were asking, but I think that there was a lot of me in this book, all the way from, I'm probably in every character, some more than others, but it was the kind of the energy that pushed it forward. You can find it's just like reading the parables of Jesus in some sense, because you can find yourself in virtually any character in a parable. What's it teaching you? What's it telling you?
Yeah, I think Nat and I have talked about this quite a bit. The parable of the prodigal son, right? When I was a teenager, it was all about the boy for me.
Right.
It was all about him going off to the far country, doing what he wanted to do. I thought the story was all about that guy.
That's right.
And it wasn't until I became a father that I realized, hold on. That's not the story here.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes a story about this father, right, who graciously takes back this wayward son. And then it becomes, wait a minute, I'm not even sure it's about that guy. I think it's about the older brother.
There it is.
And then it was like, okay. And there's so many layers, right? And at different points in your life, the story speaks to you in a different way. We've talked about the Ragamuffin Gospel as a changing point for a lot of people in deconstruction, right? And the first time I read it, I was like, it was all right. It's an okay book. And then years later, I'm in like this crisis of faith and everything's falling apart around me. And I read this book and it just completely breaks me, right? It just shatters me to my core. And it's just really where you are. We can talk about, different types of artistry, right? Nat jokingly or not so jokingly continues to call U2 the greatest Christian rock band of all time, right?
I stand by that
and
statement.
And I think one of the reasons why that's an okay statement for me and a factual statement for me is because I think that's what a Christian rock band should be like.
Yeah, man.
It's like they're just there writing music. Take from it what you want. If it speaks to you spiritually, awesome. If it speaks to you just as a good time, great.
That's awesome.
And they never shove it down your throat. And that's, I think, fiction has that option too, right? Fiction writing has that option too of creating a beautiful story that pulls you in, and then you can decide to go deeper if you want. And if you don't, and you just want to have a good time and read a book, go ahead, just read the book.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's kind of what you're working on too.
Spot on.
With this book.
Yeah, it absolutely is. One of the ways that people can get it. When's this coming out?
I think we need to talk about pushing it to the day before your book drops. What do you think, John? Because his book drops on the 7th. We could drop it on the 6th. Yeah. I mean, we've done that for some others. It would be nice to have something out prior to. Hey, by the way, this book drops tomorrow. If you're hearing this on Monday, it comes out on Tuesday on the 7th, right? Yeah. So they can get it through Amazon, I'm guessing. Yeah.
So it'll be everywhere online. I will probably still offer signed copies of paperback and hardback for people, and they can do like a PayPal or a Venmo deal. I'd rather the money go in my pocket than Jeff Bezos, but
amen to that, my friend.
It's a difficult thing, I think, as an author, because in one sense, you want the number one book in your category and all the notoriety that comes with it, but at the same time,
you don't want to circumvent those processes, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, any way that people want to buy it, they can. I mean, Kindle, paperback, hardback. I think the audio book should be coming out at some point. And then people can PayPal me or Venmo me as well.
Are you narrating your own audiobook?
I'm not going to on this one. I hated it. I hate the process. I hate recording my voice. I hate listening to my voice.
I think John should start narrating audiobooks. What do you think? Like it all began in 1974.
It is the worst thing. I did it with my last book, and I have Logic Pro X, and I had it all set up, and I've got the book, and I think I had it on my screen of my computer, and there's so much that can go wrong. I mean, anything from noises you didn't expect, phone forget to silence, or you mispronounce a word, or you screw up the sentence, or the intonation's not right, or the passion's not there. And I'm just like, screw this. I'm so done. It took me longer to do the audiobook than to write the stupid thing. So actually, I had somebody contact me about 3 or 4 weeks ago and just offer to do it. And they have a great voice. And I'm like, dude, you are a lifesaver. So
yeah, for sure. Well, it's kind of like when John and I jumped into podcasting, we thought the same thing, or John did. I didn't think a damn thing. So John knows this. I was like, he's like, you want to do this? I'm like, yeah, what? Yeah, just tell me what to do, whatever. So John's the brains behind this whole thing. He put it together. He set everything up. All I've done is, show up and reach out to a few friends and, get some people on the show. But, But for the first, what was it, like 3 episodes, John engineered everything.
Yeah,
naively thinking, how hard could this be?
It was so bad.
You want to know how hard it is? Go listen to our first 2 or 3 episodes, and you will see like how much having a professional editor, who, Eric, if you're listening, dude, you're the man. He makes us sound like we know what the hell we're doing. But yeah, I can imagine it's the same. It's the same because we go back and listen to episodes now. I'm like, oh, dude, that's okay. Like, we didn't screw that up entirely because somebody who knows what they're doing edited this and put the hours in, put it all together right. So I'd imagine audiobook narrators probably get that crap all the time. Like, dude, how hard is it? Read the book. No. No, there's a ton that has to go right in order for it to not sound convoluted.
Man, I would re-cue it. Every time I screwed up, I would re-cue it and start over. And then I would finally wised up and I'm like, no, just do it in one track and then go through and chop it up with a razor blade. throw
exactly.
the bad parts out. But it just took way more time. I like doing that stuff, but I don't love it that much. So.
Yeah, no, that's the first couple episodes that Eric edited for us. He was letting us know how many edits he made. I think he just stopped doing that. Thank God. He was like, this last one, blah, 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 we had 247 edits. And I'm like, I don't need to know this anymore. Stop it. Because he's, every it always sounds much, much more polished, when we release those. Plus, he's got the intros and the outros. I'm like, oh man, we're like a semi-legit podcast. But I am a fan of generally when authors read their own books, as long as, Brad Jersak's book, Her Gates Will Never Be Shut. The guy that read that, and I've told Brad a few times, and he's terrible. Like, I mean, so the guy's, he's reading a book that's steeped in all, theological jargon, and he doesn't know how to say any of it. And so he keeps saying these words, and it's just throwing me out of the narrative because he's mispronouncing words. And, he's saying stuff like 2 Corinthians and, I forget. I can't even think of one now, but they were so obvious as he went through them. And there was, there just wasn't a lot of like, hey, not a lot of passion. Brad speaks with a lot of passion. But anyway, I totally get the fact that it's not as easy as it sounds or as it looks. It's like talking to David Hayward, the guy the Naked Pastor, right?
Oh, and,
he draws these very, deceptively simple cartoons and manages to convey just a crap ton of truth in a couple of simple lines. It's not easy, man. It's an art form all of its own, but it's easy to dismiss that and say, he's drawing, stick figures. Yeah. So that being said, fiction's the same, right? Just tell a story. No, there's all the stuff that goes in and out of it, and there's all the plot lines, and unless you just want it to not be interesting. So I imagine there's some twists and some turns and some things that you have to keep straight in your own. I'm going to keep coming back to the lizard monkey brain because I think that's amazing.
See my notebook. No, I wish you could see my notebook. It's tattered and torn and full and arrows and scratches, and it is. I don't even know how I kept it straight, honestly. But I think that for me, the easy part, believe it or not, is writing the book. I said it's like a marathon and it's painful, but once I land on the idea, like that's the thought before the idea, but then the idea comes, and after I've sat on it and I realize that there is a real passion that if I don't get it out there, that I'm going to explode. That's the easy part for me, is writing it, because I become hyper obsessive. I'm waking up at 4 a.m. and writing till 8 a.m. I'm writing all weekend long, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. But the thing that absolutely terrifies me is this part right here. It's you've gestated this thing for 2 years, and there's the fear that you've put so much love and attention into every detail, to every part, to every line, to every word. And there's so much depth of heart and soul into it, and the fear that no one will read it. And then there's the other part where I don't think that I'm as fearful of this next part, because I'm starting to get some of the early reviews in, and it's been overwhelmingly good. But there's the fear of, like, what if they tell you that your baby's ugly?
Then you love it anyway, man. You love it anyway.
You do. So I guess my appeal to your audience is, look, you don't know me. You may, you probably don't, but I want you to trust me that this is a book worth your time. It's a book worth your money. It's a book worth your investment. And typically I would just have a Kindle book and a paper book, but I'm like, this book feels like that it needs to have a hardcover as well. I mean, that to me, there's something to that. And I really pushed for it, and Ralph was like, absolutely, we'll do it. So I don't know. Cool. I appeal to your audience to trust me in this. And just more than anything, the other thing I realize is that I can put out the coolest stuff on social media. I can try to convince people to buy it. But the really, truly 99.99999% of the time, the way that a book sells is by people telling another person, and it's a personal interaction and it's a personal appeal. And so my appeal is to your audience to trust me to buy it. But then if they do resonate with this book, would they please tell people about it? Because we're small little guys with choir. Some are bigger than others. I'm probably one of the smaller guys on the totem pole here, but it really comes down to word of mouth and people sharing their heart with other people about what they've experienced with this work.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, we'll definitely do that. And we'll link to all your stuff in the show notes and your blog and your website. And
well, I want to add just my 2 cents on what you were saying there is, and I'm going to appeal to our listeners and say, so when it comes to fiction, there's books that just grab you, right? And there's books that take a little while. I was instantly hooked from like the first few sentences in. So I would appeal to the listeners to just grab the book. You're not going to be disappointed. You know, I've admitted that I haven't finished the book. You know, I'm about 25% in, but I'm loving it, and I want to finish it. So I'm going to be, you know, over the next couple of days finishing it. But my 2 cents is you're going to like it. And I definitely pick it up. Definitely grab it.
I'm ordering it. Did you see that? I just ordered it.
I can't. All I see is a big glow on your screen.
Well, I just clicked order. Anyway, so I did it through Amazon, so to get the points. I'll send you an extra $5 so you make up the, or I'll mail it to you for a signature and you can send it back to me. But
there you
go. No, John and I am, for no other reason than we just love writers and authors and people who put out good content. We tend to buy the books of everybody we interview. We don't ask them for free copies. Sometimes they send them anyway, but you deserve to be supported. And I've been remiss lately because I've just been so darn busy with this new business that I have not done my homework as well as I should. So I've got a stack of books from people we're about to interview and people we've just interviewed, but we do buy the books and promote the books, and the work of people that we interview. We genuinely believe in what y'all are doing, and Choir in particular is my favorite publishing house. I mean, the stuff that they're putting out, the authors they're finding, the voices that they're promoting and giving platform to are necessary and needed. Something needs to challenge the narrative of, you know, some of the mainstream so-called Christian bookstore writers, you know. Not that we don't like them, but sometimes their ideology needs to be challenged. And so I love that. And so for that reason, in particular, we'll promote and we'll push and we will do our very best with what tiny little bit of influence we have, with our dozens and dozens of listeners to, hey, the audience is growing, man. We broke into the top 200 for our podcast. You haven't looked again to see if we're still there, have you, John? You don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. I know.
No.
But no,
I'll push you right out of the top 200 with this interview.
Woohoo! Right on. No, well, we're honored that we're the first one you've done for this book, man. That makes me super happy, man. We're about to have some great content coming out, and I count you in that list of awesome people. Here's what I love, and I'm going to close this with this, John, and I'll let you shut it down. But I 100% love the fact that I can come into an interview like this with admittedly not much knowledge of who you are and what you're, and just have the best time and just have like the coolest conversation.
Yeah, man, that's good. You guys have been great. Love having these conversations.
Yeah, me too. And sometimes it's fun to come into it and just not have an agenda or direction. Let's just see where the conversation takes us. And so guys like you, who can come and do a little give and take, and, you know, I'm really excited to read your book. Hopefully you'll be here in a few days once it drops, and then I'll put a review on Amazon or something and give it 1 star and tell people this is heresy, and then we'll sell more copies that way. So it'll be controversial. I'm just kidding.
That's the best kind of advertising, I guess.
There you go, man. There's no such thing as bad press, right?
Well, hey guys, I know you're pressed for time, but I appreciate the space you've given me and the conversation, and look forward to picking it up again, especially after you read it. That would mean everything to me.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, John.
All right. Well, I just wanted to, also just add my 2 cents and just thank you for taking the time and coming and talk to us. We really appreciate it. Every one of these conversations ends up being way better than I think either Nat and I expect. And I think, again, not to just kind of reiterate, but part of that is that we just don't have an agenda. We don't. We want to come in and just have a real conversation. We don't. Very rarely do I have questions written down. I think Nat's the same way. And I just love the way the conversation just flows. So again, just thank you. Listeners, buy the book.
Buy it.
By the time you hear this, you'll be able to buy it. And we want you to buy it. So again, thank you for coming on.
Cool. Thanks, guys. We'll talk later.
You bet. All right, man.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.